The diner smelled like burned coffee and bacon grease the morning a woman I had never met slid into the booth across from me, set a folded paper napkin under my hand, and said, "Don't read it until you're alone, and lock your doors tonight." Then she got up and walked out before I could even close my mouth around a question. I want to tell you I did something brave in that moment. I didn't. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, watching her grey station wagon pull out of the lot and turn onto Route 3, and I thought, that poor woman is confused. I was 68 years old. I had buried a husband 11 months earlier. I figured the world was just going to keep handing me strange little griefs like that, one after another, and I had better learn to swallow them. I should back up. My husband and I bought the place on Cobb's Pond in 1981, the year our daughter started kindergarten. 40 acres, most of it woods, a stretch of shoreline, and an old fieldstone house his grandfather had built by hand. It was never worth much on paper. That part of New Hampshire was the kind of place people drove through on their way to somewhere prettier, but it was ours, paid off by the time we hit our 50s. And after he passed, I told myself I would die in that house the same way he did, quietly, in his own bed, with the loons calling out on the water. My daughter had other ideas. She started coming up most weekends after the funeral, which I told myself was love. She'd bring her husband, and the two of them would sit at my kitchen table with their laptops open, like the place was a branch office. The first few times it was, "Mum, are you eating?" And "Mum, you can't keep heating this whole house in winter." Reasonable things. Things a daughter says. But somewhere around the 8th or 9th visit, the tone shifted, and I started noticing how my son-in-law would wander off to look at the property line while she kept me talking in the kitchen. "You're sitting on a gold mine and you don't even know it," he told me once, standing at the window with his coffee, looking out at the trees like a man appraising a used car. Lakefront's gone insane. People from Boston, from New York. "You could clear 7 figures, Mum. Easy." I told him I didn't want 7 figures. I wanted the loons. He laughed like I'd made a joke. That morning at the diner, the napkin morning, they were with me, the two of them, in town to help me run errands, which had become code for them steering me toward a lawyer's office to sign something I kept refusing to read. They'd gone up to the register to settle the check, leaning into each other the way they did, talking low. That's when the woman appeared. By the time they came back, the napkin was already in my coat pocket and my hands were shaking, and I'd decided not to mention it to a living soul. "Everything all right?" my daughter asked. "You look pale." "Just tired," I said. She studied me a second longer than I liked, then smiled. "We worry about you out there alone. You know that." I did know it. I was starting to understand it was the only true thing she'd said in months. They dropped me at the end of my driveway and declined to come in, which was new. I watched their SUV crunch back down the gravel and disappear, and I stood there in the cold a long while, listening to nothing, feeling watched by woods that had never once frightened me in 40 years. Inside, I locked the door. Then I went around and locked the others, and checked the windows, which made me feel foolish and old and paranoid all at once. I put the napkin on the kitchen table, and I sat across from it the way you'd sit across from a snake, and I waited until the sun went down before I unfolded it. It wasn't much. A small flat key, the kind that opens a safe deposit box, taped to the inside, and underneath, in pencil, in handwriting that pressed so hard it nearly tore the paper, 11:40 tonight. Pick up. Don't call anyone. Don't say my husband's name out loud in that house. I read it 4 times. My husband's name. How did this stranger know I had one? Let alone that I'd want to say it. I turned the key over in my fingers. It was warm from my pocket and felt heavier than it should have. I am not a dramatic woman. I raised a child, nursed 2 parents through their dying, ran the books for a hardware store for 19 years. I do not jump at shadows. but I will tell you that I locked myself in my own kitchen that night and watched the clock on the stove tick toward 11:40 with my heart going like a rabbit's, and when it finally hit 11:39, I had to remind myself to breathe. The phone rang at 11:40 exactly. The landline, the one almost nobody calls anymore, the one my husband insisted we keep for emergencies. The sound of it in that dark, silent house nearly stopped my heart. I picked it up. "Hello?" For a moment there was only breathing, then a voice, low, scraped, like it was coming through a bad connection or a hand cupped over the receiver. A man's voice. And under the distortion, in the rhythm of it, in the way he leaned on the second half of my name, the way he leaned on the second half of my name, the way only one person ever had, I heard my husband. I had to grip the counter to keep my knees. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Listen to me," the voice said. "I don't have long, and neither do you. Don't trust our daughter. Don't trust the man she married. And whatever you do, do not trust the sheriff's office. Who is this?" It came out flat. I wasn't asking. I was begging. "They're going to tell you you're not well. They're going to try to take the house out from under you, and if that doesn't work fast enough, they're going to make sure you have an accident." A breath. A crackle. "I didn't drown out there. You need to understand that. I did not drown." The line dissolved into static. I said his name into it, his real name, the one the napkin had told me not to say, and the static swallowed it. Then one last fragment, faint. "It's under the boathouse. You have very little time." And the call ended. I stood there with the dead receiver against my ear for what must have been 10 minutes. I finally hung up and dialed *69, the way you do, to see who'd called. The recording told me the last incoming call had been from my daughter at 4 that afternoon. Nothing at 11:40, nothing at all. I did not sleep. I sat at the table until the windows went grey, and I thought about the thing nobody had let me think about for 11 months. That my husband, who would run a boat on that lake for 40 summers, who could swim across the whole pond at 60, had supposedly fallen out of his own canoe on a calm August evening and drowned in 8 feet of water 100 yards from his own dock. They'd ruled it an accident. "His heart," the coroner said. A spell of dizziness, a tumble, cold water, an old man. I had been too gutted to ask a single hard question. I had let them put him in the ground, and I had let it be an accident because the alternative was unthinkable. It had become thinkable. My son-in-law showed up the next morning before 9, which he had never done in his life. No call ahead. He just rolled up the driveway like he had a key. And it occurred to me, with a cold drop in my stomach, that he probably did. He came in carrying 2 coffees and that easy salesman's smile. "You look rough, Mum," he said, setting a cup in front of me. "Didn't sleep?" "Not much," I said. He sat. He sat. His eyes did a slow tour of my kitchen, my husband's old roll-top desk in the corner, the door to the back room. "We need to talk seriously now," he said, "about your situation. My situation. There it was. Property taxes went up again this year. You saw the bill. The roof's going to need 10-15 grand soon. And the heating in this place. Mom, you're burning through your savings to keep a museum running." He said it gently like it pained him. "We've been talking to someone. There's a thing called a conservatorship. It's just a legal arrangement. It would let us handle the money side so you don't have to stress about any of it." "You want to be in charge of my money," I said. "I want to take care of you." "And the house?" He didn't blink. "The house is the problem, Mum. That's the whole point. We sell it. You move somewhere with a little less land and a lot less worry, and there's plenty left over to keep you comfortable for the rest of your life. Everybody wins." My daughter arrived an hour later. She didn't sit. She leaned against a doorframe and scrolled her phone and finally looked up and said, in a voice I didn't recognize, "I pulled your accounts, Mom. I'm on them as a beneficiary. I had the right. You're spending faster than you should. It worries me. It worries the both of us." She paused. "Some people, after they lose a spouse, they get confused. They make decisions that aren't in their own interest. They talk about strange things." Her eyes held mine. "Have you been hearing anything?" "At night. The phone. The voice." My blood went to ice. She was building a case. She wanted me to admit I'd been hearing my dead husband on a telephone so she could write it down and show it to a judge. "I sleep just fine," I said. She wasn't convinced and didn't pretend to be. "You should think about what your father would want. He'd want you safe. He'd want this settled." I almost laughed. I knew now, with a certainty I couldn't explain, exactly what my husband had wanted. He'd wanted me to lock my doors. "You both need to leave," I said. My son-in-law's face changed then. Just for a second, the smile fell off it and something flat and unfriendly looked out at me, before he caught it and put the smile back on. "We're trying to help you," he said. "I know what you're trying to do," I said. "Get out of my house." They left. My daughter didn't look back. My son-in-law did once, and the look on his face was the same look you'd give a problem you hadn't solved yet. I stood at the window and watched them go, and I understood that I had crossed a line, and that they would cross one back, and that the only question left was how much time I had. I went out to the boathouse that afternoon. It sat at the bottom of the slope, half over the water, a sagging old structure that smelled of gasoline and lake rot, and 40 years of my husband puttering. I hadn't been inside since the funeral. His life jacket still hung on its peg. His fishing rods stood in the corner where he'd left them. I stood in the doorway and made myself remember the voice. "It's under the boathouse," and I started looking. It took me an hour to find it. There was a workbench bolted to the back wall, and under it, where you'd never look unless you knew, a section of floorboard that lifted out. Below was a hollow. He must have dug himself, lined with a plastic tub, sealed tight. My hands were filthy and shaking by the time I pried the lid off. Inside, a thick spiral notebook, the cheap kind, swollen with my husband's cramped handwriting, a stack of papers in folders, 3 flash drives in a sandwich bag, and an envelope with my name on it in his hand. I sat right down on the cold floor of that boathouse and read the letter first. "If you found this, then I couldn't fix it in time, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you to carry it. But you were always stronger than you let yourself believe, and you're going to need every bit of that now. Don't trust the people who'll tell you they're protecting you. Trust what's in this box. Forever yours." I cried then, hard, the way I hadn't let myself at the funeral. Then I wiped my face, and I started reading the notebook, and the crying stopped, because what was in that notebook turned my grief into something with a harder edge. My husband had been writing it for almost 2 years before he died. It started small, odd things he'd noticed on the back 40, near the old granite quarry that had been on the land since before his grandfather, a flooded pit we'd kept the kids away from their whole lives. Trucks at night, tire ruts that shouldn't have been there, a chemical smell off the water after a rain. He'd gone out one morning and found dozens of steel drums sunk in the quarry pond, and more buried along the tree line, leaking something that killed the brush around them in brown rings. He traced the trucks. They belonged to a waste-hauling outfit, and the waste-hauling outfit, he discovered, was a subsidiary of a development company, and the development company was the same one that had been quietly making offers on lakefront properties up and down our shore for 2 years, the same company that employed, as its regional acquisitions manager, my son-in-law. I had to put the notebook down and breathe. They'd been using our land, our quarry, the one piece of the property nobody ever visited, as a dumping ground for industrial waste they were paid to dispose of legally and instead buried for free on an old woman's acreage. And the plan, the whole long, patient plan, was to get the property into the family's control, get me out, sell it to the parent company at a loss. and let the development bury the evidence under a new subdivision forever. Foundations poured over poison. Nobody would ever dig there again. My husband had figured all of it out. He'd photographed the drums. He'd copied manifests. He'd even, the notebook said, confronted our son-in-law one evening out by the quarry, told him he'd given him 30 days to come clean before he took it to the state. The last dated entry was 4 days before he drowned. I knew then. I knew the way. You know, the floor is solid under your feet. They had killed him. My daughter's husband, and maybe my daughter, had killed the man I'd been married to for 46 years because he wouldn't let them poison the ground his grandchildren walked on. I was still sitting on that floor when my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a number I didn't know. You found it. Good, don't go to the sheriff, he's theirs. Don't confront them. They already know you've been in the boathouse. Stay inside tonight and wait for my call. A friend of your husband's. I looked up at the boathouse window, through the dirty glass, down by the road. A dark pickup truck I didn't recognize was idling at the end of my driveway. As I watched it pulled away slow, I gathered everything, notebook, folders, drives, into a canvas bag, and I went back up to the house, and I locked every door, and I sat in the dark and waited. The phone rang at dusk, not the landline. My cell. Don't say my name and don't say yours, a woman said. The same flat, careful voice from the diner. I'm the one who left you the napkin. My name is Marlene. I worked the environmental side for the state before I retired. Your husband came to me 8 months before he died, off the books, because he didn't trust anyone official up here. He was right not to. He told me not to call anyone, I said. On the phone. Last night, that was you, wasn't it? Some kind of recording you made it sound like him. A pause. I made it sound like him. A pause. I made it sound like whatever I had to make you take it seriously. I'm sorry. I knew you wouldn't move for a stranger. I needed you to move. Her voice softened a fraction. He talked about you constantly. I knew enough to fake it. Forgive me later. Right now we don't have time. They killed him. I believe they did, and I think the box you found can prove it, along with the rest. But here's where you have to be smart, because they're cleaning up. The hauling company filed for the quarry to be remediated starting Monday. They've got a permit. Once the heavy equipment goes in, those drums and your husband's photographs of where they were, it all turns to mud. 2 days. That's what we've got. Then we go to the police tonight. The county sheriff up here ran his last campaign on money that traces back to that development company. His chief deputy signed off on the original drowning report in about 10 minutes. You walk into that building with this, and you'll walk out with nothing and a 48-hour psychiatric hold for the trouble. She let that sit. But the people I called this afternoon don't answer to the county. EPA's got a criminal division. So does the FBI. I spent the day getting it in front of someone who'll move. They want the evidence, and they want the people on tape. Which means we have to get your daughter and her husband to say what they did, out loud, somewhere we can record it. I closed my eyes. Out the kitchen window, the last light was leaving the lake. You want me to bait my own child, I said. I want you to give her the chance to be innocent, Marlene said quietly. If she didn't know, she won't incriminate herself. If she did, then you already lost her a long time before tonight. You're just finding out about it now. I sat with that. It is a terrible thing to be 68 and learn that the child you carried might have helped bury your husband. But I had read the notebook. I had seen my daughter's face in my own kitchen, asking if I'd been hearing voices at night, building her case. I already knew. What do I do? I said. The plan was simple, which is the only kind of plan that works. I sent my daughter a text that night. You're right, I'm too old to fight this. I want to settle it. Come tomorrow evening, just the two of you, and bring the papers. I'll sign. She wrote back in under a minute. Oh, Mum, thank you. We'll take care of everything. I bet you will, I thought. The next day passed in a fog. Marlene came in the early afternoon with two people who did not give me their last names. A woman with a federal badge clipped inside her jacket, and a quiet young man who spent an hour wiring my kitchen and the lamp over the table and the old smoke detector, with things the size of buttons. They took the canvas bag, the notebook and the drives, and gave me a receipt for it, an honest-to-God numbered receipt, and somehow that little slip of paper was the thing that finally made me believe I wasn't crazy. They told me where to stand. They told me to keep them talking. They told me a car of people would be a half-mile down the road the entire time, and that the second I said the words, "I'm scared," they'd come through the door. Then they left, and I waited in my own house for my daughter to come and rob me. They arrived at 6, in the dark, headlights swinging across the kitchen wall. The two of them came in together, my son-in-law carrying a leather folder of papers, my daughter behind him with her hands jammed in her coat pockets. I had a fire going and the table set like I was hosting. I poured coffee with steady hands. I have no idea where the steadiness came from. My husband, maybe. I felt him in that room. "This is the right thing, Mum," my daughter said, sitting. "I know it's hard." "It is hard," I agreed. I let my voice shake, which wasn't difficult. Before I sign anything, I need to understand something about your father." My son-in-law's hand paused on the papers. "What about him?" "I went out to the boathouse," I said, "yesterday. I found his notebook." The room went very still. My daughter's face didn't move at all, and that stillness told me everything. But the federal woman had been clear. I needed words, not faces. "He wrote down what was in the quarry," I said. "The drums, the trucks. He wrote down that he gave you 30 days. I looked at my son-in-law, and then 4 days later he drowned. In water he could stand up in. "Mom," my daughter started. "Did you know?" I asked her. My voice cracked open right down the middle. "I need to hear it. Did you know what he was going to do to your father?" For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then my son-in-law set the papers down, and the easy smile was gone. And the flat, unfriendly thing was looking out of his face again. And he said, "Your husband was going to cost us everything. He was an old man who couldn't see the bigger picture. We offered him a fortune to look the other way, and he wanted to play the hero. So you killed him." "It was supposed to be a scare," my daughter said suddenly, and her voice was high and strange. "Just to make him stop. He wasn't supposed to." She stopped herself, but it was too late, and we all knew it. "He was a liability," my son-in-law said, low and cold. "That's all. And so are you, if you make me do this the hard way." "I'm scared," I said. The door came off its hinges. I have never in my life heard noise like that. Boots and shouting, and the word "federal agents" over and over, and lights, and my son-in-law going down onto my kitchen floor with a knee in his back, and my daughter screaming, and the coffee cups jumping on the table. I stood pressed against the counter while it happened, perfectly still, my husband's voice in my ears, and I watched them put handcuffs on my only child. She looked up at me from the floor. "Mom," she said. "Mum, please." I had thought in all the imagining that I would feel something break in me at that moment. Instead, I felt something settle, hard and clear and quiet, as a stone going down through water. "You made your choice," I told her. "I didn't. Your father didn't." They took her out into the cold. She didn't fight. At the door she looked back once, and her face was the face of a little girl who was finally understood that this time there would be consequences. Then she was gone, and my kitchen was full of strangers, and I sat down in my husband's chair because my legs would no longer hold me. Marlene found me there an hour later, after the cars had gone. She didn't say anything wise. She just put the kettle on and sat with me, which was the only thing worth doing. The weeks after were a blur. I'll spare you. There were statements and lawyers and men in waders pulling drums out of my quarry onto floodlights while a federal photographer documented every one. They found the manifests my husband had copied. They matched them to the company. They reopened his case. The coroner's accident did not survive a second look once people were actually looking. My son-in-law was charged with enough things to fill 2 pages. My daughter was charged with fewer, but charged. The chief deputy who'd signed the original report resigned before the indictment reached him, which surprised no one. And one afternoon, a letter came from a law office in Concord I'd never heard of, and inside was a thing I had not known existed, a trust my husband had set up quietly 8 months before he died, right around the time he first went to Marlene. He put the house in it. He put money in it, more than I knew we had, squirreled away over years. He'd built it so that if anyone ever tried to force a sale or push me out, the trust would lock the property up tight and trigger a review. He had known, he had seen exactly how it might go, all the way down to our own daughter, and rather than frighten me with it, he had spent the last months of his life building a wall around me out of paperwork and love. And then he had walked out to that quarry alone, so I wouldn't have to. I sat at the kitchen table and cried until I had nothing left, and they were not all sad tears. I won't tell you it became easy after that. It didn't. There is a particular loneliness to outliving a marriage and then losing a child to a prison sentence, and no amount of justice fills that hole. I visited her once, months later. She couldn't look at me at first. When she finally did, there was no fight left in her, only a tired kind of sorrow, and I found I didn't have it in me to perform a forgiveness I didn't yet feel. But I told her the truth because she was still mine, and the truth was the only thing I had left to give that was clean. Your father loved you until his last breath, I said, and he loved you enough to know he couldn't trust you with this. That's the saddest thing I've ever had to understand. But it's the truth, and you're going to have a lot of years to sit with it. She nodded. She didn't argue. When I left, I didn't look back, because I'd learned by then that looking back is a thing you only do when you're not sure of the ground in front of you, and for the first time in a long time, I was. The quarry is clean now. They hauled out the last of it in the spring. I leased the back acreage to a young couple who keep bees and grow more than they can sell, and they bring me honey on Sundays and ask me to tell them about the man who built the house. I tell them, I leave the worst of it out. Some things a person earns the right to keep to herself. I'm 70 now. The loons came back this year, the way they always do, and on the quiet evenings I take my coffee down to the dock my husband built, and I sit where he sat, and the water is only water again. I used to think strength was something you were born with or you weren't, and that mine had run out somewhere around the funeral. I was wrong about that. Strength isn't loud and it isn't brave. It's just what's left standing when everything you leaned on is gone, and you find out you can stand anyway. The most dangerous person in my life was never a stranger at a diner. It was the child I raised at my own table. I think the hardest, truest thing I know now is that love and betrayal can grow from the very same root, and that the people who tell you they only want to keep you safe are sometimes the ones you most need protection from. My husband knew it. He tried to tell me in the only way he had left. I'm still here. The house is still mine. And the truth that was supposed to stay buried in that quarry forever sits in a courthouse file now, in the open air, where the dead can finally rest and the living have to answer for what they did. I lock my doors at night still, but I sleep.